Persia had just conquered the Babylonians, and Cyrus is well informed that Daniel was third rank in the Babylonian kingdom. He therefore puts Daniel in charge, giving him the highest rank as a member of his new cabinet. The other 120 princesses were filled with envy that a Jew who was a war prisoner from Babylon should rule over them. So they contrived a charge against Daniel for insubordination to a new law regarding prayer. Daniel did not start praying or stop praying. He continued to pray as usual. There followed a conspiracy, then an investigation, and an interdict. The scheme worked, and Daniel is arrested, indicted, tried, convicted, and sentenced. But the whole plan began to unravel, and soon backfired, and his accusers are put in the lion's den. The outcome pleases the king, and he sends a decree that everyone was to fear and revere the God of Daniel. Daniel was held in high esteem in both political regimes. And now for my exposition of chapter 6. Verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. This chapter begins with the Medo-Persian Empire, which conquered Babylon in 538 BC. 2 years later, King Darius died, and Cyrus took the throne. The kingdom was divided in 120 provinces, and each prince ruled each province. This present king, whose name is Darius, is the uncle of Cyrus, who 2 years from now will be the ruler. However, there will be others who will have the same name and rule in Persia. Verse 2. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. The first acts of a government are to set up a new government to manage the affairs of the kingdom. Who would be better fitted to manage the affairs than Daniel? After all, he was fully aware of the territory and how to keep the affairs of the kingdom running smoothly. Verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. When the new government was formed, it was decided that there should be 3 presidents over the entire kingdom, and that they should report back to the king. The king appointed Daniel as the highest-ranking member of his cabinet. Daniel had an excellent spirit in him. A boy in Spurgeon's class read it one time. An excellent spine was in him. That was poor reading, but good theology. This man Daniel was a man of real backbone. The kind of person described here is a man of boldness, a man of vision, a man of real character and good disposition. No government is better than the members of its ruling cabinet. Verse 4. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. No man can have a better recommendation than the one that is herein attributed to Daniel. A wicked plot was formed to try and overthrow Daniel. They chose to attack him on the grounds of his religion. It was a well-known fact that he faced Jerusalem and prayed 3 times a day. The Persian princes, filled with envy, did not want to see a prisoner of war ruling over the kingdom. They were jealous of his ability and were fueled with ill will and malice. It was burning in their bones, and so the princes called a meeting of the minds in order to contrive a charge against this high government official. Verse 5. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. The plot and conspiracy spread among the princes, and while they could not arrive at a charge against his conduct in the affairs of the government, they nevertheless didn't like his respect of the law of God. Verse 6. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. A man with this kind of character and conviction will stand out like a blooming flower in a barren desert. These men were intent on kicking the ladder out from under Daniel. Private meetings were held in the closest of secrets. They have now been granted a meeting with the king. Verse 7. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, and the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Under the appearance of honor to the king, the drama begins to take shape. The king's loyal subjects emerge with a hatchet job on Daniel. Apparently, the king hasn't seen through the sham. While the meeting is taking place, Daniel probably is somewhere in the kingdom conducting government business. Verse 8. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. The vote was unanimous. The princes have cast their ballot, and all that was lacking was for the king to sign the document. The Medes and Persians believed in infallibility. This law was irrevocable under any and all circumstances, and now all they lacked was the enforcement of the regulation. The Medes and Persians had the crazy notion that any law that was ratified by the king's signature could never be changed. Verse 9. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. The ordinance had been drawn up by their lawyers, and the document was now in written form, and having passed all legal bodies, the king sees no reason not to sign the interdict. After all, it will expire in 30 days. Verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Knowing that the conspiracy was formed, he did nothing to prevent it. He simply committed himself to God and left the issue to providence. On bended knee, he revered and praised God. Daniel didn't do this for spite, because it says, as he did aforetime. The enemies of Daniel had witnessed him praying before the edict was issued, and knew that they could make such a charge. Now that the interdict has been issued, Daniel was not intimidated. Religion is doing what is right. Verse 11. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. They became their own special investigator by spying on Daniel. So far, their scheme worked well. Verse 12. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Yes, they complained that the poor captive, who is entirely dependent on you for all he enjoys, is far from being grateful and appreciating your favors, regards you not nor pays any attention to your decree. This group of hypocrites pretend that they have just discovered that Daniel was not keeping the edict. Verse 13, Then answered they and said before the king that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. The men had a vicious motive for going before the king. The matter is thus presented in as bad a light as possible, a common trick of politicians. When the rulers in Acts 5 forbade the apostles to speak or teach in the name of Jesus, they said, quote, we ought to obey God rather than man, unquote. Verse 14, Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Darius, seeing that he was a victim of a subtle plan, he probably tried to get the conspirators to relent or repeal the law. Darius is like a trapped animal trying to release himself from a trap. The matter is ratified, the thing is fixed, and the decision stands. Verse 15, Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. They reminded the king that the law is irrevocable. Verse 16, Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Daniel is arrested, arraigned, tried, and sentenced. If anyone's going to save Daniel, it has to be God. Verse 17, And a stone was brought, and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. What a dilemma. The law demanded that he die. Love demanded that he live. The large boulder was rolled against the mouth of the pit, which was similar to a cave entrance. Daniel's enemies made sure that the paperwork was properly executed, that it had the correct signatures, namely those in authority to execute such a sentence. In this case, it required the seal of the king and the lords. Verse 18, Then the king went to his palace, and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. The king went to bed without any supper. He had a rough night, tossing and turning, no music and no entertainment. Darius knows that he's been had by his own princes. He realizes that he's been tricked into destroying his best and most trusted president. His conscience is eating at him like muriatic acid on a concrete floor. Verse 19, Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste unto the den of lions. At the crack of dawn, without his breakfast, he rushes to the lion's den. He's not in the best of moods, since he hasn't slept all night. Verse 20, and when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? As he approached the lion's den, he's filled with a compound emotion of hope and despair. To cry out in a lamentable voice surely describes a king who is troubled over his stupid law that he has enacted. So he shouted sorrowfully, hoping that his voice could be heard through the cave entrance, and that the response would be an affirmative answer from Daniel, and not the roar of a lion. Verse 21, then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. Your majesty, live forever. The king had been suspended on a spider's web of hope and despair, not knowing if Daniel was dead or alive. The voice was familiar. Same old Daniel, respectful, no resentment or bitterness. Verse 22, my God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they may not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Daniel was vindicated, his innocence declared. In a candid but respectful manner, Daniel explained to the king that his God had preserved him. Daniel says that God had sent an angel to protect him. Perhaps the same angel that was sent to deliver Peter from prison in Acts chapter 12 and verse 8. Verse 23. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. The king is beside himself with joy over the deliverance. He orders his security forces to roll back the stone and release the captive. Daniel came out of the lion's den unscathed, from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. Verse 24. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Josephus, in his book on Antiquities of the Jews, writes an article on Daniel in the lion's den. I herewith copy the same, quoting now from Josephus. Whereupon the king, not being acquainted with their wicked design, nor suspecting that it was a contrivance of theirs against Daniel, said he was pleased with the decree of theirs, and he promised to confirm what they desired. He also published an edict to promulgate to the people that decree which the princes had made. Accordingly, all the rest took care not to transgress those injunctions, and rested in quiet. But Daniel had no regard to them, but as he was wont, he stood and prayed to God in the sight of them all. But the princes, having met with the occasion they so earnestly sought to find against Daniel, came presently to the king, and accused him, that Daniel was the only person that transgressed the decree, while not one of the rest durst pray to their gods. Thus discovery they made, not because of his impiety, but because they had watched him and observed him out of envy, for supposing that Darius did thus out of a greater kindness to him than they expected, and that he was ready to grant him pardon for this contempt of his injunctions and envying this very pardon to Daniel. They did not become more honorable to him, but desired he might be cast into the den of lions according to the law. So Darius, hoping that God would deliver him and that he would undergo nothing that was terrible by the wild beast, bid him bear this accident cheerfully. And when he was cast into the den, he put his seal to the stone that lay upon the mouth of the den, and went his way. But he passed all the night without food and without sleep, being in great distress for Daniel. But when it was day, he got up and came to the den, and found the seal entire, which he had left the stone sealed withal. He also opened the seal, and cried out, and called to Daniel, and asked him if he were alive. And as soon as he heard the king's voice, and said that he had suffered no harm, the king gave order that he should be drawn up out of the den. Now when his enemies saw that Daniel had suffered nothing which was terrible, they would not own that he was preserved by God, and by his providence, but they said that the lions had been filled full with food, and on that account it was, as they supposed, that the lions would not touch Daniel, nor come to him, and this they alleged to the king. But the king, out of an abhorrence of their wickedness, gave order that they should be thrown in a great deal of flesh to the lions. And when they had filled themselves, he gave further order that Daniel's enemies be cast into the den, that he might learn whether the lions, now they were full, would touch them or not. And it appeared plain to Darius, after the princes had been cast to the wild beast, that it was God who preserved Daniel, for the lions spared none of them, but tore them all to pieces, as if they had been very hungry and wanted food. I suppose, therefore, it was not their hunger, which had been a little before satisfied with abundance of flesh, but the wickedness of these men that provoked them to destroy the princes. For if it so pleased God that wickedness might, by even these irrational creatures, be esteemed a plain foundation for their punishment. Book 10, Chapter 11, Article 6. End of quote. Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. The king sends a proclamation to all 120 provinces in his realm. The letter begins with the words, May peace be unto you. Verse 26, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. His proclamation contains the words that Daniel's God is to be feared above all other gods. He declares that God is immutable, that his kingdom cannot be overthrown, and that his dominion is forever. Verse 27, He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Daniel tells the entire world that the reason for his proclamation of trembling before the God of Daniel is because he's able to deliver, rescue, do signs in heaven and wonders in earth, and that to prove that he had delivered Daniel from the lion's den. Verse 28, So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel was held in high esteem in both political regimes.